Hi.
Just peek around the curtain.
How you doing? I am indeed Evan Smith, the CEO of the Texas Tribune. Welcome to South by Southwest and this featured session with Beto O'Rourke, the Democratic nominee for governor of Texas in 2022. A native of El Paso, graduate of Columbia University, Mr. O'Rourke spent 7 years on the El Paso City Council, then served 3 terms in the U.S. House representing District 16. In 2018, he was the Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate against Republican incumbent Ted Cruz. No Democrat has won a statewide election in Texas since 1994, and the races haven't even been competitive. But Mr. O'Rourke came within 215,000 votes of sending Senator Cruz on a permanent trip to Cancun. It was the closest U.S. Senate race in Texas in 40 years, a margin of only 2.6%. Mr. O'Rourke won what was at the time the most votes ever by a Democrat running for statewide or federal office in Texas history. The next year, he ran to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States. That one didn't go so well. After kicking off his campaign with an infamous Vanity Fair cover in March of 2019, he failed to get traction in a field of 24 candidates and dropped out of the race 3 months before the Iowa caucus. In December 2019, he launched Powered by People, an organizing group focused on voter registration and engagement. He spent nearly 2 years traveling the state and mostly dodging journalist questions about when he was going to run for governor. The answer, it turned out, was November 15th, 2021. That's the day he announced. On March 1st of this year, primary day, he won his party's nomination with 91% of the vote against token opposition. He'll face the 2-term incumbent Republican Greg Abbott in the November general election. Please join me in welcoming Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah. Everybody. Gracias.
Good. Thanks. How you doing?
I'm good.
Good.
Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. Thank you very much for doing this.
My pleasure.
So you've run for significant offices each of the last 2 election cycles. These are grueling campaigns. They take a toll on you. They take a toll on your family. Also, running for statewide office, as I said, in Texas as a Democrat is pushing a big rock up a big hill and has been for a long time. Why are you doing this a 3rd time?
I've run in the last 5 election cycles. I ran
Right.
in 2012 against an incumbent member of Congress. And the polling at this time in the race in 2012 had us a snowball's chance in El Paso prevailing. We got out there, we knocked on doors, we talked about the issues that mattered most in El Paso, namely the fact that if you were a veteran in our community, you'd put your life on the line, you're willing to give it in service to this country, you could not get into the VA to see a provider, to get the mental health care help, for example, that you earned and needed and would have saved your life. I talked about that issue at every door to every person that I met. And at the end of the day, in a 4-person race, we were able to win that without even a runoff. It was one of the biggest upsets that cycle. And so I had a chance to serve for 6 years, ran those next 2 cycles, and then, as you said, ran for the Senate in 2018. Why do I do this? Because I have this extraordinary opportunity to join amazing people in service to my state and to this country. There's no higher honor. I'm grateful for the opportunity, and I love the fact that we're in this race right now.
So that's the affirmative case for you. I was going to ask you to make the case for yourself without using the words Greg Abbott.
Yeah, I just did.
The positive case. Okay, so that's the positive case. Now use the words Greg Abbott. What is the case against him? You and I have been around long enough to know that every election is supposedly about the next 4 years, but really it's about the last 4 years. It's a referendum, not a choice. So make the case against the governor.
You are seeing, I just had a chance to meet with the ambassador from the EU. And we talked about the fact that you're seeing the continued rise of authoritarians and thugs across the world. And we have our own right here in the state of Texas.
Greg Abbott is a thug in your mind?
He's a thug, he's an authoritarian. Let me make the case. Not only could this guy, through his own incompetence, not keep the lights on in the energy capital of the planet last February, but when people like Kelsey Warren and other energy company CEOs made more than $11 billion in profit over 5 days, selling gas for 200 times the going rate. Not only did he not claw back those illegal profits, not only was there no justice for the more than 700 people who were killed, who literally froze to death in their homes, outside, in their cars, people who are paying now tens of billions of dollars cumulatively to pay for the property damage that the flooding that ensued caused in their homes. But he's taking millions of dollars in payoffs from these same people who made that. He's got his own oligarch here in the state of Texas. You think this stuff only exists in Russia or in other parts of the world? It's happening right here. You think they rig elections in other parts of the planet? It is the toughest state in the nation in which to vote right here. 50% of some of the mail-in ballot requests in some counties were denied, including by a 95-year-old World War II veteran who was willing to give his life to fight fascism 70 years ago, half a world away, to defend democracy at home, and cannot participate in elections in this state. This is a guy who is attacking women, will not allow them to make their own reproductive health care decisions about their own body, their own health, their own future, puts a $10,000 target on the back of anyone who tries to assist any women. And while we have real challenges in our public schools, namely the fact that 7 out of 10 fourth graders cannot read at grade level today, or that teachers are grossly underpaid against their counterparts across the nation, what's he doing about it? He's targeting transgender kids and turning in their parents. And if these investigations are successful, not only is that transgender child taken from the custody of that parent, but so is every other kid in the household. That's what this guy is doing in the highest position of public trust in this land. We need to make sure that we get back to the big things, creating great jobs, focusing on world-class public schools, doing common sense bipartisan things like expanding Medicaid so that fewer people die of diabetes and more people can get health care. We can do that, but we've got to get past this guy, this extremism, these fringe politics that are so deeply hurting the people in the state of Texas.
So you mentioned the grid, we're going to come to that. You mentioned Kelsey Warren, we're going to come to that. You mentioned voting, we're going to come to that. But I actually want to stay for a moment with the families of trans kids. I've been thinking a lot about the role that the governor plays in this state. It's the legislature, not the governor, that passes laws. We hear a lot about how in Texas it's really the lieutenant governor who is the most powerful elected official, but the choices the governor makes matter. Yesterday, there was a lot of activity on this question of the investigations of the families of trans kids. That was a governor's order to investigate those families. Legislature didn't do that. The lieutenant governor did not do that. The governor did that. I read in the Texas Tribune that a state judge said we need to stop this series of investigations, that the governor's order may be unconstitutional. I read that the attorney general is having to sue the federal government because the federal government is threatening to withhold $1 billion to the state of Texas over this issue. I also saw that a whole bunch of big companies, Apple, IBM, Google, Meta, put out an open letter accusing the state of engaging in anti-LGBTQ behavior. The point is what the governor does, and in this case specifically, what the governor does matters and potentially has consequences. So you're in office on the first day as governor. You get elected. This thing is still in effect. First day, you kill this thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you know what else I read in the Texas Tribune is that...
Oh, tell me.
Yeah. So...
Do tell.
While the governor has this crazed fixation on transgender kids and their families,
right,
he has been told for the last 7 years that we have a crisis in foster care and child protective services in the state. Kids in CPS offices are sleeping on top of the desks, in the hallways, underneath tables, because they cannot be placed because there aren't the resources, the oversight, or the leadership from the governor. But then get this, 4 months ago, Governor Greg Abbott is warned that there is a facility here not too far from Austin and Bastrop where children who have been trafficked for sex are in the custody and care of the state of Texas, and they are in turn being abused by their caretakers. We just learned from reading the Texas Tribune yesterday that those same kids who had been rescued from sex traffickers are now being trafficked for sex by their guardians in the state of Texas. The governor knew there was a problem for 4 months and did not do shit to help those kids out. You know what he did instead? He tried to further divide and fracture and polarize this state, pitting us against each other, on issues like abortion and transgender kids, and letting anyone who wants carry a loaded gun in public without any kind of background check or vetting or training whatsoever. We do have real challenges and problems in the state of Texas. When I'm governor, we are going to focus on them.
So you mentioned the grid. Let's go directly to the grid. You have made the grid a central issue, if not the central issue of your campaign. Talked about it every place you've went. We're a little bit more than a year out from the horrible winter storm that caused the grid to shut down. You alluded to the cost, at least $100 billion to the state, probably quite a bit more than that. The official number is 250 deaths. You chose the number that is said to be the higher number, maybe even as much as 700. What exactly was the governor's culpability in this? He didn't cause the weather. He was not governor back in 2011, the last time we had a storm, and there was a grid failure of sorts, not quite as bad, and they chose not to weatherize the power plants. What exactly did the governor do to cause that last February?
So you said he didn't cause the weather. It gets a lot colder in other parts of the country,
right,
and yet they didn't have the kind of power outages that we had here in Texas. That governor on whose desk the buck stops was warned repeatedly that we had underlying vulnerabilities in the grid, namely that we had failed to weatherize and winterize the gas supply. Well, when the temperature dropped last February, the gas supply literally froze at the wellhead, and we couldn't get it to the generators that spin and produce the electricity that power our homes. He knew about that, was warned about that repeatedly, 2011, 2014, right up until the day that he promised all of us in February of last year that we'll be able to keep the lights on in the state of Texas. And the lights went out, and the heat failed, and the water stopped flowing because the pipes froze as well. And people lost their lives as a consequence. But to add insult to injury, not only did he not fix it when he was warned before we had the outages last year, he still has not fixed it more than a year later. We still have yet to weatherize and winterize the gas supply. I don't know, but it may have something to do that he's accepted more than $4.6 million from the gas supply companies, CEOs, and interests who don't want to invest in winterizing their part of the grid, and who also like the $11 billion that they stole from all of us. Mayor Ron Nirenberg of San Antonio calls it the largest transfer of wealth in the history of the state of Texas. $11 billion over 5 days. And just to be clear, Evan, that's illegal. There is state statute, the Deceptive Trade Practices Act, that specifically names fuel as one of those things that you cannot gouge the consumers of Texas over when there is a declared emergency. And the governor declared that emergency on February 12th of 2021. When I'm governor, we're going to take those folks to court. We're going to get the $11 billion back. We're going to seek treble damages and get more than that, send that back to the ratepayers, and make up for the fact that right now you are paying an extra $45 on average every month in every single utility bill. We call that the Abbott tax, because we're paying back what they stole from us last February. That's unjust, it's not right, and as governor, I'm gonna make sure that we fix it.
What would you have done differently? Had you been governor last February, what would you have done differently, specifically, than Abbott did?
You could probably see this one coming from a mile away, but I would have weatherized the gas supply.
No, you couldn't weatherize the gas supply between February 11th and February 12th. So the storm comes.
That's just the thing.
But nobody knows the storm is coming until it comes. What would you have done after the storm hit?
After the storm hit, I would have weatherized the gas supply. I would have connected ERCOT to the national grid so that we can draw down power when we need it. El Paso, where I'm from, is not part of ERCOT. El Paso, where I'm from, last February got just as cold as some other parts of the state, but we didn't lose power because we can draw power down from the rest of the country when we need it. And look, we're Texans, we generate a lot of energy and power here. We can sell it back onto the national grid when we want to. I'd also impose an independent market monitor who can be the cop on the beat to make sure that no one ever charges 200 times the going rate for gas and breaks contracts and good faith with the utilities, some of which, Brazos Electric, for example, are $2 billion in debt right now. And that debt's going to be paid back by someone, and that's you and me and every ratepayer in that group. So those are a few things that we could do. And then I want to make sure that we invest and create the jobs to winterize and create energy efficiency in our homes, in our buildings, in our offices, so that we draw down less power, pay lower rates going forward, are less dependent on oil and gas, so that we can use it when we really need it, either here in Texas, or if it makes sense, to send it in form of LNG to Europe, where they don't have to depend on Russia anymore going forward. So there's a lot that we could do if we had real leadership in that office.
You understand that weatherizing the gas facilities is not the purview of the governor. That's the Railroad Commission's responsibility as the regulator of those facilities, and it would be the legislature that would have to put that in front of the Railroad Commission, which they sort of have done, sort of. But you as governor could not just summarily say we have to weatherize the gas plants.
You might not be able to summarily do anything, but the governor has extraordinary powers to convene the legislature, the members of the Railroad Commission, to engage with public sentiment and make sure that there is the public pressure necessary to form the political will to actually get the thing done. It's just a matter of our priorities and what we choose to focus on. And when I'm governor, I'm going to focus on keeping the lights on and saving the lives of our fellow
So
Texans.
on the question of keeping the lights on, so you are critical of what happened or did not happen after the storm last year. We had another winter storm in February of this year. As you know, much was made of the possibility that the grid would fail again. You yourself went on what you called a keeping the lights on tour of Texas, 12 days, 20 cities and towns, to highlight the risk to all of us. Here's what happened. The lights stayed on, right? The grid did not collapse in February when we had this storm. You were worried enough about it that you went on a branded tour, making us all aware of the risk, and then the lights did not go out. So problem solved?
Yeah, that's not accurate.
I don't remember the lights going out, Congressman.
No, for the rationale that you gave for me traveling the state, it wasn't because I predicted that the lights would go out. It was to call attention to the fact that they did. Many people were harmed. Hundreds lost their lives. There's been no justice. For every family member of someone whose life was lost because of the governor, I've asked them, did you ever get a call from Greg Abbott or anybody in his administration to apologize, to check in on you, to see what you need? And all of them, to a person, have told me no. They also are paying tens of thousands of dollars to repair their homes that were damaged in that storm that God nor Mother Nature caused, but Greg Abbott is responsible for. I want to make sure that people understand why that happened and why they're paying higher electricity bills. And to your point about this last February storm, it was nowhere near as bad as it was a year ago. The temperature did not drop as low. It didn't stay as low for as long. It didn't affect as many parts of the state. And everybody who follows this knew that that would be the outcome. But what we also know is that if we see extreme or severe weather like we had a year ago, it's very likely that we'll see grid failure in the state of Texas. The estimate by energy experts is that we are 40% short in our ability to generate the capacity necessary to meet the demand because we have yet to weatherize and winterize the gas supply and connect Texas, ERCOT, with the national grid.
So you brought up Kelsey Warren. Let me poke the bear with a stick here, as you have attempted to do already in this conversation. So this is Kelsey Warren, the co-founder of Energy Transfer, chair of its board, top donor to the governor, is suing you for defamation over your criticism of the profits his company made in 2021, reportedly just Energy Transfer, $2.4 billion as demand for gas soared. You're critical of the fact that he made a $1 million donation to the governor afterward. The lawsuit says you accused him falsely of, this is a quote, serious crimes including extortion, bribery, and corrupt influence. He says you defamed him. Did you defame him?
No. The best defense against libel is the truth. And by pointing out that this person's company made $2.4 billion, while a Vietnam-era veteran who could not charge his oxygen tank at home went out to his truck to try to charge it there, and they found him later frozen to death in this state after his years of service and sacrifice to this country. After an 11-year-old boy in Conroe, Texas, froze to death in his bed because his mom could not pile enough blankets on his body to keep him warm enough to survive the night. This guy's company made $2.4 billion, and that money did not appear from the sky. It was taken from you and every other ratepayer in the state of Texas who will be paying that $2.4 billion back in higher utility bills every month, every year for the next 2 decades. That is wrong. In fact, it is illegal. And we talk about Putin and the oligarchs there in Russia as though it's some kind of foreign concern. We have them right here. This guy is getting filthy, illegally rich off the natural resources of this state and then charging us a premium, 200 times the going rate, just to be able to stay warm in our own homes when the temperature drops. And Abbott, instead of holding him responsible and accountable and getting that money back and ensuring that he serves some time or there is some justice for what he's done to the people of Texas, takes a $1 million campaign contribution.
Yeah, but
that's wrong.
Yeah, but the issue here is the connection between the two. He's saying that you're drawing a straight line from the profits made by Energy Transfer.
What would you call it? What would you?
I'm not
running. You write $1 million.
I'm not running for governor. I'm asking you if you can prove there was a connection between the donation and the profits. That's what he's alleging. He's saying you're defaming him because you're drawing a straight line. I'm not running for governor. You are. Draw the straight line.
We're going to just continue to tell the truth, and the facts that I laid out, I think, stand for themselves. And folks are welcome to come to different conclusions if they want to, but I think we have a very clear case of a governor who stands with the corporations and the high-dollar donors and the people who have tried to rob the people of Texas blind instead of the very people he was elected to serve and represent. We've got to change that, or we're going to continue to see more of the same.
All right, let's go to voting. You also talked about voting. You spent a lot of the year plus, in fact, almost 2 years before you got into this race, on the road all over the state, registering voters, encouraging people to vote, and arguing against the changes to election law passed by the legislature, supported by and signed by the governor. We just had the first election day with those changes in effect. A lot of mail-in ballot applications rejected. You alluded to this, and a lot of mail-in ballots themselves rejected. Alexa Ura, my colleague at the Tribune, yesterday reported that in just 16 of the largest counties in the state, nearly 19,000 mail-in ballots were rejected for failing to meet the new law's ID requirements. Rejection rates were between 6 and 22% in these counties. The last election cycle, 2020, the statewide rejection rate was less than 1%. Suspicions confirmed in your mind?
Yeah, this is not a flaw, this is a feature.
It's not that the thing isn't working, it's that it's working exactly as intended.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mentioned the World War II veteran. Willie Nelson had his ballot request rejected 3 times. Because for those who don't know, the new law signed by Governor Abbott last year requires you, when you want to vote by mail in the midst of a pandemic, or if you have a significant disability, or if you're 95 years old, like that World War II veteran, you have to use the same form of ID with which you originally registered to vote and match that with the ID that you have right now voting in 2022. Well, that World War II veteran may have registered to vote 70 years ago. We can forgive him if he doesn't remember the form of ID that he used at the time. But it's targeted specifically in big counties like Harris, like Dallas, like Travis, like El Paso, to disenfranchise voters who might otherwise threaten the governor's purchase on power. This is clearly an indication that they fear us, the people of Texas. Otherwise, they wouldn't try to rig the rules.
They're targeting urban counties, for the benefit of the non-Texans in the room. They're targeting urban counties, you think, because urban counties tend to vote Democratic.
That's absolutely right. And it's not out of keeping with a tradition of voter suppression in the state of Texas. In 1923, this is 100 years ago, the state legislature literally outlawed in black and white in the state statute voting by African Americans in the state of Texas. And that law stood until it was struck down by the Supreme Court in 1944, Smith versus Allwright. You had poll taxes, you had literacy tests, you had annual re-registration efforts. It might have been one party at one time, a different party at another time, but it's always the people in power trying to hold on to that power by stopping those in this state from voting and freely and fairly electing those who would represent their interests. It's the same game plan taking place right now. The only answer to that, I wish the Department of Justice would intervene right now. I wish the Senate would pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I wish we would make voting rights more of a priority in this country. But to my fellow Texans, no one is riding to the rescue. There is no cavalry that is coming our way. This one is on us. And what I'm most grateful for, Evan, is that we've had more than 55,000 people sign up to volunteer in this campaign. We're not waiting to deploy them this summer or in the fall to remind people about early voting. They've been knocking on doors over the course of February, 4.5 million voter contacts just in last month alone. We're making sure that we connect with those voters so that they understand the rules of the road going forward and that we turn them out to vote and overcome this voter suppression in Texas.
You know, the argument for this change to election law, what the legislature passed, was and they branded it this way, easier to vote, harder to cheat. They push back against this very line of argument, saying this is simply about voter fraud. We want to prevent voter fraud. Who is for voter fraud?
Check this out. So it is easier now to carry a gun on the streets of Texas than it is to vote in our polling places in Texas. Despite the fact that over the last 5 years, 35,000 licenses to carry a firearm were denied by law enforcement because they deemed those people too dangerous to themselves or to others in a state that has 4 of the worst mass shootings in American history just in the last 5 years. Now, any one of those 35,000 people can carry a gun in public without a background check, without any vetting, any training whatsoever, as can the tens of thousands who knew better than to apply for a license to carry because they never would have passed the background check in the first place. You have seen a spike in gun violence. More cops, more sheriff's deputies, more members of law enforcement have been gunned down in the state of Texas than in any other state. So when you hear bullshit about defund the police, and some folks support law enforcement, some don't, Greg Abbott turned his back on those members of law enforcement who put their lives on the line for this community, and they're losing their lives at a faster rate than in any other state because of it. He is doing precisely the wrong thing instead of standing up for voters and making sure that we can choose our members of city council, our state reps, or the next governor of this state. Again, more polarizing, divisive legislation that harms and hurts and ends up killing our fellow Texans.
So you brought up guns. You held the door open. I'm going to walk through it, okay? Let's go back to September 13th, 2019, Democratic presidential primary debate in Houston. David Muir from ABC News is the moderator. He says the following to you as one of the candidates on that stage. Some on this stage have suggested a voluntary buyback of guns in this country. You've gone farther. You've said, quote, Americans who own AR-15s and AR-47s will have to sell them to the government, all of them. Then Muir says to you, you know that critics call this confiscation. Are you proposing taking away their guns, and how would this work? Your response was, I am, if it was a weapon designed to kill people on a battlefield. Then you go on to tell the very tragic story of the shooting in Odessa and the devastation people suffered in that community. And then you said at the end, this is the exact quote, hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47, we're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore. Right? You said that. Fast forward to earlier this year, news conference in Tyler, Texas, February 15th of 2022. In response to a question from a New York Times reporter, you said, I'm not interested in taking anything from anyone. You later told the same reporter in an interview you were not walking back your original comments. Boy, it sure sounds like you were. Could you clarify this once and for all? Do you want to confiscate guns from people in Texas or not?
I do not believe that any civilian should have an AR-15 or an AK-47. They were designed for a singular purpose, to kill people on a battlefield. And as you know, I've met with many people who have been shot by an AK-47 in Del Sol Medical Center, University Medical Center in El Paso, after 23 people were slaughtered because someone inspired by Donald Trump and Greg Abbott, who was asking Texans to defend themselves and take matters into their own hands against Mexican immigration, came to El Paso and shot up a bunch of people, and before that posted online and said, I came here to repel the invasion of Hispanics to the state of Texas, who are going to politically take over this state and replace us. And by us, he meant white people here in the state of Texas. I saw what that does to you, that high impact, high velocity round that just tears up everything inside, shreds your organs to pieces. It's what it was designed to do so that enemy soldier stays down on the ground and cannot get back up again. I see no reason outside of a battlefield or a theater of war that anyone should have that. So I hope that is crystal clear about my feeling on the issue. I also want to make sure, as a Texan who understands the long, proud tradition of responsible gun ownership in this state, that we defend the Second Amendment, that all of us who grew up using guns for self-defense, collection, sport, hunting with our family members, parents like Amy and I who have taught our kids the responsibility of gun ownership, that we build on that and find common ground with Republicans on things like universal background checks, safe storage laws, extreme risk protection orders. These are the kind of things where we can find consensus and, yes, even some compromise, because we cannot allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good, and defend that Second Amendment and save more lives in the process.
So, fine. Thank you for the longer answer, but I'm going to come back to the question I asked you, which you didn't tell me. Do you want to confiscate those automatic weapons, the AR-15s, the AK-47s? Do you want to confiscate them or not?
Yeah, I gave you an answer. So I don't think anyone should have one. And if I can find the consensus within the legislature to have a law in the state of Texas that allows us to buy those AK-47s and AR-15s back, we will. As you said earlier, I cannot mandate or dictate anything as the next governor of the state of Texas. I'm going to have to do this by listening, working with people, building goodwill and consensus and trust, and then moving forward. And the first three areas where I think we can do that are on universal background checks, which would have prevented the shooting and slaughter in Midland, Odessa. Safe storage laws, which would have helped us prevent the massacre at Santa Fe High School. That's an idea that Rhonda Hart gave us. She lost her daughter in that school shooting.
Yep.
And extreme risk protection orders, where we know someone is going to be a danger to themselves or someone else, and we get that gun out of their hands before they can use it on themselves or someone else. So this is where we can start. And we've got to make sure that as we move forward, we focus on what is possible. And as governor, that's what I'll do.
Okay. Let me ask you a question about the border. The other campaign, Abbott campaign, has made a big issue of criticizing your position on the border. They say that you're not for a wall. You're not for a wall, right? That's actually a place in which you probably agree. You agree that you're not for a wall, right?
I'm not for a wall.
Yeah. They say you're for open borders. Are you?
No. I live on the border, as you know.
I do.
I think you've visited my house on the border. I can see Ciudad Juarez from my front porch. There's no one more interested in the security of my community than Amy and I, right?
Yep.
We're raising 3 kids in that community. El Paso happens to be one of the safest cities in America. It was the safest city in America prior to the building of the wall, which was initiated not by President Donald Trump, but by President George W. Bush, continued by President Barack Obama, and continued again by President Trump. Crime rates actually went up during wall construction and after the wall was completed. We are one of the safest cities in America, not despite, but because we're a city of immigrants, because we are connected to Ciudad Juarez. It is the source of our strength, our success, and yes, our security. So what we don't need is more chaos and confusion, which is exactly what the governor's creating on the border. For those who haven't read this, he's activated 10,000 members of the State Guard and deployed them to the border, 10 days notice, to tell their families, their kids, their employers that they'll be leaving for a year to be part of a solution in search of a problem. 4 of those Guard members have taken their lives over the last 5 months. 2 others have died, not because they were killed by undocumented immigrants, but in accidents and accidental gun discharges. All of them are taken from their true purpose in life, being nurses, being school teachers, being parents to their kids. And it's costing all of us in the state of Texas billions of dollars. And to add insult to injury, the governor can't pay them on time. He's cut their tuition benefits in half. They are miserable and morale is suffering. That's not making us safer, Evan. That's not security. That's more chaos and confusion. As governor, I'm going to make sure that we lead on this issue. And we bring the best minds, Republicans and Democrats alike, together on this, and then make sure that the federal government's response in comprehensive immigration reform reflects Texas priorities, Texas values, and Texas interests. We are the defining border state. We get this. We understand it. We cannot lead if we're leading with fear. We have to lead with our knowledge and our understanding of what it means to enjoy the success of these immigrants being in our country and being connected to the rest of the world at our border with Mexico.
So you were very critical, and not just you, of the Trump administration's handling of the border and specifically of the humanitarian crisis on the border. Is Joe Biden any better? And if he is, tell me the ways in which. Because there are a lot of people who say, we had a bad situation before, we still have a bad situation. In some ways, the stats would suggest that the situation may be as bad or worse now. So give me your sense of the Biden administration's border policy.
Well, he hasn't put any kids in cages. He hasn't torn 8-month-old babies from their mother's arms, deported the mom back to Honduras, and put the kid up for adoption or foster care. He tried to reverse the Orwellian-named Migrant Protection Protocol, which takes asylum seekers who've traveled 2,000 miles, literally the length of this continent, fleeing brutality and potentially death in many cases, and made them live in squalor in refugee camps in Ciudad Juarez or Matamoros or Tijuana. He's trying to meet this with the best traditions and interests of the United States at heart. But has he done enough? No. He really hasn't. Until we address the root causes of this migration and this refugee challenge that we have, which are the underlying problems in the Northern Triangle countries of Latin America, who have seen the United States intervene in their civil wars for more than half a century, who've been hollowed out by the demand for illegal drugs that transit through their countries and in many cases originate in their hometowns, who've had the United States deport back violent criminals who've been raised in our criminal justice system into communities that are absolutely defenseless against them, who are bearing the brunt of climate change that no country has more to contribute to than the United States. Until we take on our responsibility and address those underlying issues and help people find a reason to be able to stay in those home countries, we're still gonna see it. You cannot build a wall high enough. You cannot meet it with enough cruelty to stop it. People are still gonna come. You would not, when your kids were much younger, send them on a 2,000-mile journey in the hands of a smuggler unless that was the only way to keep them alive and to save their lives. That's what these same parents are doing right now. Let's acknowledge that. Let's meet that crisis where it originates, and I guarantee you we will not be having this same conversation in 5 years. But until we do that, we will.
All right.
Yeah.
I want to go to questions from the audience, but I got to ask you a couple questions about the fall campaign. So we talked about President Biden. He is not popular in Texas. In the last Texas Politics Project poll, 36% approve, 52% disapprove. Number one, is he a drag on your chances to get elected governor? Second, if he offered to campaign for you here, what would you say?
He's not a drag on anyone, and no one that I've spoken to or listened to across the state of Texas, and I've been to every part of it, is bringing up Joe Biden, nor are they bringing up Donald Trump. They are focused on what Greg Abbott is doing to them and their communities, the challenges that he's imposing that they face, the higher utility bills, for example. The fact in rural communities that this guy vetoed the Universal Service Fund, which means that your internet and phone bills are going up anywhere from $50 to $100 a month, that 24 rural hospitals have closed down since 2005, and this guy will not expand Medicaid so that we can reopen them or get more people connected to the care that they need. No one's talking about the president, they're talking about the governor, and the governor that they want to have in that office who's gonna fight for them and Texas families instead of the corporations and the big donors. So no, I don't want Joe Biden or anyone else from outside of Texas coming into this state to campaign for me or anyone else. This one is on us, the people of Texas. We are going to decide our future, our fortune, our fate, and given the people of Texas, I like our odds.
Well, you say that no one's talking about Biden. Well, the Abbott campaign is talking about Biden. They're making everything into Beto Biden this, Beto Biden that. You're just going to ignore that and just keep going.
If I had failed as badly as Greg Abbott, if I could not keep the lights on, if I killed 700 of my fellow Texans, if I had more children in hospitals because of COVID than any other state, because I prevented teachers and principals from requiring masks in the classroom when it was running rampant through those schools, I'd be talking about Joe Biden as well.
Same thing as well. Right. Does the math work to win this race? I looked at the numbers on primary day. You talked about all the work that Powered by People did in turning out people to vote, registering people. I still saw that the Democratic candidates, all of them, and you got 92% nearly of the vote, less than 1 million people turned out. Fewer than 1 million people turned out on primary day. Abbott himself got 1.2 to 1.3 million votes. The two challengers to his right, I didn't know there was a right, by the way, but apparently there is. They got another 500,000 votes. I mean, the fact is that the Republicans had a pretty significant vote and enthusiasm advantage over the Democrats on primary day. Heading into the fall, the question is always more a math problem than a politics problem. Do the numbers work so that you or any Democrat can win statewide?
They do, and let me just tell you this.
And how do you get there?
In 2020, there were more Democrats who voted in the primary than Republicans. And yet Donald Trump won the state by 6 points. So primary turnout performance is not a predictor of what's going to happen in the general election. When I ran in 2018, there were 500,000 voters who voted for me for U.S. Senator, and those same 500,000 voters voted for Greg Abbott for Texas
Yeah,
governor.
there were Abbott Beto voters.
500,000 voters. I only lost to Ted Cruz by 216,000 votes. So if just under half of those voters can be persuaded that this guy who has banned abortion, who is targeting transgender kids, who is killing cops through this irresponsible gun policy, who cannot keep the lights on in the state of Texas, should not serve another term, I think our chances look good. And then when you add to this the 7 million Texans who did not vote in 2020, even though they were eligible, and the number one reason given by them was that no one ever knocked on their door or asked them to vote in the first place, and match that with the 55,000 people that I have out there knocking on their doors right now. We don't have to bring in all 7 million. We could bring in 3, 4, 5% of those 7 million previously non-voting Texans, engage them in this election, and we win. They are out there. We decide our own fate. As Joe Strummer said, the future is unwritten. And the authors of that future are in this room and throughout this state right now. And again, given the folks that I've met across the state of Texas, I was in Victoria yesterday, Nacogdoches the day before. I'll be in Johnson City after I talk with you. Austin tonight. For anyone who wants to come out, go to betofortexas.com and sign up. What I see across this state is people who want to do the work. They understand that in a democracy, there are no sidelines. Everybody's on the field. So I feel really good about the math and our chances, and most importantly, the people of Texas.
My last question relates to what you just said. Victoria, Nacogdoches, later this week, Weatherford, Olney, Vernon, Childress, Pampa, Canadian, Dalhart. These are rural communities. Joe Biden significantly beat Donald Trump in the urban counties, even though he did less successful in the Valley and in South Texas than Hillary Clinton had been. He still won by 150,000 votes in South Texas. Fought Trump to a draw in the suburbs. Trump's margin in rural Texas over Biden was 1.7 million votes, margin. Ended up winning the state by 600,000, even though Biden had an almost a million vote lead in the urban areas. You traveled to all 254 counties in 2018, talked to people in rural communities who had never seen a Democratic candidate before. You're doing it again. Isn't geography the issue here? Not demography, but geography? That if you can't get rural voters to consider voting for Democrats, there is no way that a Democrat can win statewide. What do you do about that?
You've got to show up. I remember we had a very fierce internal debate in our campaign in 2018 about going to college campuses and community colleges and senior high school classrooms. And the conventional wisdom is young people don't vote, don't waste your time and resources on them. And my answer to that is maybe they don't vote because candidates and office holders aren't showing up to listen to them. And we went to every college campus in the state of Texas. Young voter turnout in that election was up 504%. I think the same holds true for rural counties. If a Democrat is not there to prosecute the case, that your rural hospital has closed down because Greg Abbott has not accepted Medicaid expansion, that your rural telephone and internet bills are going up, if you can get online, because half of rural Texas does not have broadband internet in the year of our Lord, 2022. That didn't just happen because you live in a rural community. It happened because the governor chose his corporate donors over your community. He wants to defund your public schools. That's the largest employer in many of these rural communities. And he wants to take your tax dollars, convert them into vouchers, and send them to private schools in the big cities. Now, people can be forgiven for not knowing that if the candidates don't show up and connect the dots. I am showing up in Childress and in Dalhart and in Nacogdoches yesterday to make sure people understand the true cost and consequence of Greg Abbott being in office, and to also make sure that we all agree that we have a better choice. So we may not win those counties outright, but we can win more votes.
Got to do better. Just got to do a little bit better.
Absolutely. 2.6%. That's all we were down in 2018. This state has added millions of new voters, including in these rural communities. I'm excited to meet them and to listen to them and to hear from them. And just as we're doing today, it's not a rally, it's not a big speech and then I leave town. I introduce myself and then I take questions and comments and suggestions, including from people who disagree with me. And I learn from it and I'm a better candidate for it.
So speaking of questions, let's go to questions for the balance of our time. There have been a couple questions that have come in about the abortion ban. Yesterday we had the state Supreme Court essentially end the discussion of the challenge that providers were bringing to try to unmake this abortion ban passed by the legislature, signed by the governor. If you come in on the first day as governor, you could end the investigations of trans kids' families. You could not summarily make abortion legal past 6 weeks as governor on the first day. What do you do about this? How do you talk about this? How do you think about this as an issue? A couple questions have come up on that.
Yeah, this is all about finding the common ground, and this is the genius of our democracy. No one's going to get everything that they want. We've got to find a way to find some common agreement on these issues. And so I'll use my mom as an example, my very Catholic mother, on this issue of choice and abortion. We may disagree on some aspects of this, but when I share with her that not only have we outlawed abortion, not only did we put that $10,000 bounty on the backs of our fellow Texans who try to assist a woman in making her own health care decisions, but we are right now at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis. I was in a barbershop in Nacogdoches 2 days ago. And one of the people that I met, I asked him, how did you come to Nacogdoches to cut hair? And he said, I moved here with my wife. I lost her a day after she gave birth to our son. The epidemic of maternal mortality in Texas is 3 times as deadly for black women in the state. And when you shut down reproductive health care in Texas, not only is it harder for a woman to access an abortion, it's harder for her to get a cervical cancer screening, any kind of reproductive health care at all, or just the ability to see a doctor in many of these remote and rural communities. And we are losing the women of Texas as a result. We also lead the nation in the rates of teen pregnancy and repeat teen pregnancy right now. And when I share that with my mom, she said, well, those aren't good things. And I said, that's right. We've got to make sure that we guarantee that more people can make their own decisions about their own bodies. And Mom, it's not just about abortion, although that's a constitutionally protected right, but it's also about saving the lives of the people of this state. There's some common ground in that conversation with Republicans and folks who consider themselves to be pro-life. And for those who do say that they're pro-life, I want to direct their attention to the state foster care system and to CPS and to these girls who are being trafficked right now and to these trans kids in the classroom who are more likely to harm themselves now that they have the most powerful man in the state going after them. So there's a lot more we can do to save lives in the state of Texas. And I think that's a great conversation that we are ready to have.
Okay. So I like the question that somebody just posted. It was certainly not, they're not sugarcoating it. Why'd you bomb out in the 2020 presidential race? That was the question as it was phrased. Why did you bomb out in the 2020 presidential race?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate description of...
Would you like, I made reference to the Vanity Fair cover earlier. Would you, if you could go back, not do that?
Look, I'm not someone who focuses on regret or even the past. I was very fortunate to join a lot of really great people in seeking my party's nomination for the highest office in the country. My belief was in Texas that what we had done, bringing independents, Democrats, Republicans together, a surge in young voters, is exactly what we wanted to see to defeat Donald Trump and make sure that we saved this country before it was too late. I think there was a lot of pride, frankly, Evan, in the decision that I could come off 2 years of traveling 254 counties of Texas, giving every ounce of energy that I and our volunteers and our team had to this effort, and turn around and within 2 months try to mount a national campaign. I've learned from that, and I've also learned that it cannot be about the person, the candidate, the party. It's got to be about the people. And what we have here in Texas, both through Powered by People, the 55,000 folks who've joined this campaign so far, the people I'm meeting across the state, that's where the power is right now. We were in Austin at a vigil for those whose lives we lost last February. And we heard from an extraordinary pastor, Reverend Robinson, and she said, you know, in Texas, the people are the grid. We're the ones who powered each other through when the lights went out last year. And I really believe that. It's what's keeping us going. And despite those in power who do not have our best interests at heart, who very often turn their backs on the people they're supposed to serve, we are a good people. And we're going to be there for one another. And we're going to rise to this challenge. And we're going to overcome it. And so what we're doing right now could not be more important, and it feels so right to me, and I'm so lucky.
And you feel like the 2020 race at least has been a comparison point for you enough that you've built a campaign different from that campaign?
Absolutely.
From the presidential.
This campaign is the volunteers and the people who've signed up to join it. That's what it is.
Okay. Interesting question that actually I'm glad somebody brought up, and I should have asked this earlier. You know, you as an interviewer, there's always the one that got away. Have you accepted money from any oil and gas interests during your campaign? Since you're critical of the governor for accepting money.
There's a good chance we have. We have more than 160,000 individual donors who've contributed to this campaign. I would assume, given the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of people.
So if you're crawling up Greg Abbott's ass about taking money from oil and gas, why shouldn't he crawl up your ass about taking money from oil and gas?
Well, as we discussed earlier, it's one thing if someone's employed in one of the defining industries of Texas. And by the way, I'm proud of the people of the oil and gas industry who've secured this country's energy independence from the rest of the world. We don't need to be fighting wars in the Middle East to secure our supply lines anymore. We might, in fact, be able to supply Europe so they're no longer dependent on Russia. I'm proud of the innovation and the hard work that has brought that to bear. And I'd happily take a contribution from somebody who works with.
But not a CEO.
But somebody who stole $2.4 billion from the people of Texas while they were freezing to death in their homes turns around and cuts $1 million check to the person who is responsible for overseeing that industry and holding people like him accountable and getting that money back to the ratepayer. That's a different thing.
So if
altogether.
a CEO of an oil and gas company, not a line worker, but a CEO of an oil and gas company today offered you, because there's no campaign finance limits in Texas, offered you $1 million for your campaign today, would you take it or would you reject it?
I wouldn't take $1 million.
You would not take $1 million from the CEO of an oil company.
Oil and gas.
Not today, and you pledge, if elected, you would not take such contributions as governor.
$1 million checks from CEOs of oil and gas companies. No, I would not.
How about $500,000? Is there a limit? Should we negotiate a floor for you or a ceiling? Like, what's the?
Yeah. Listen, I do think that at a minimum we should expect a commitment to ethics and morality from those in the positions of power and trust that decide the future of this state.
Right.
And that's why this campaign is built on people, grassroots donors.
Right.
So our fundraiser. So this governor, took the $1 million check from Kelsey Warren, took another $3.6 million over the course of 10 days, just after the regular legislative session had ended, from other oil and gas interests, $4.6 million altogether. From the very people who are responsible for the collapse of this grid. The fundraiser that I'm hosting here tonight in Austin, everyone is welcome to join us. $25 to come in the door. That's how we are funding this campaign. This is through the power of people.
Okay. Here's a question that I would describe as a softball for you.
Great.
Make the case for legalizing weed. We only have 3 minutes. You probably could take all 3 minutes on this, but let's try to do it briefly enough to take another.
We were in Fort Worth at the very beginning of the campaign. A guy comes up to me and he says, I served in Vietnam, came back with post-traumatic stress disorder. They are trying to prescribe me an opioid at the VA, which is legal, to which I can become addicted, from which I might very well die, as have tens of thousands of our fellow Americans, including a whole hell of a lot of veterans. Or I can go out there and illegally purchase weed, because it's the one thing that addresses the symptoms that I have. I don't want to be a criminal in the eyes of the law in the state of Texas. Beto, will you do something about it? And I said, yes. When I'm governor, we're going to legalize marijuana in the state of Texas. We're going to make sure that we no longer lock up people for possession of a substance that is legal in most of the rest of the country, most of the rest of the free world, and that we know that Texans of all races and ethnicities use marijuana at the same rate. Disproportionately, black and brown Texans are stopped, frisked, locked up, upon release, forced to check a box on every employment application form saying that they have a conviction. So it's not enough to legalize. We also have to expunge the records of those who've served time for this going forward. So there's some justice at the end of the day.
Yeah. So we started this conversation by talking about what governors can and can't do. You say, and it's an applause line, and I know you believe it because we've known each other long enough that when you were on the El Paso City Council, this was also your brand, the discussion of this subject, marijuana laws. I know you believe it, but as governor, you can't just wave your hand over the state and say, ta-da, marijuana is legal. You've got to get the legislature involved. You are almost certainly going to have not just a majority, but an overwhelmingly Republican majority legislature. How do you get them to do this? They have to be the ones to do this, not you.
I'll let you in on a secret.
Okay.
Republicans like to get high just as much as Democrats like to get high.
Boy, that would be a secret. I will say that for sure.
No, this is one of the most broadly popular issues in.
That's going to be the headline, honestly, out of this conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
Where is the event tonight? What's the name of the coffee shop? Revival Coffee at what time? At 6:30, Revival Coffee at 6:30. Anybody who wants to continue the conversation, we would love to have you, and you are welcome.
Including Republicans who want to spark up.
Yeah,
they
that's
should
right.
actually come to Revival Coffee.
Are welcome as well.
Right, good. All right. We just got a couple seconds left. Congressman, thank you very much for making the time to be here. I know you're very busy.
Appreciate it.
Give him a hand. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
All right.
Gracias. Thank you.